Okay, so I thought what I'd first show you is putting the ballast down in the center of the track. As you can see here, I've already put some cinders down along the side of the shoulder. So this is just some black cinders, and this was just a matter of using a brush like this, painting some thin glue down on the table, and then sprinkling those cinders on. Before I get started, I'll tell you I'm using a matte medium. I went online, some folks use white glue, some use matte medium, some use scenic cement. I found this at my local Michael's store. This is full strength matte medium, and what I have done is I basically cut it 50-50 in this jar here, mixing it with distilled water. My water is hot up here in Tingsboro, so I'm mixing it, and then I just put a couple drops of soap in there. And so that's basically the glue that I'll use. And then in here, I have mixed up some alcohol, 70% isopropyl alcohol. I've cut it 50% with distilled water. And my eyedroppers, one for the alcohol, one for the glue. And then also I have my ballast in this little plastic container, and the spoon is my applicator. I do have one of those fancy little items you roll down the tracks, you know, and you're supposed to shake it out. I found that the spoon gives me a lot more control. So I'll just do a short section here and show you how this is done. And so this is the first step, putting the ballast down the center of the track. So we'll get a little ballast on my spoon. You should be able to see that right there. This is after it's been sifted. I've already sifted it. And now we're just going to tap a little of it right down the center here. Another trick with ballasting I've learned is don't do too much at once, and don't try to rush it. If you rush it, it's just not going to look good. That short section, I don't know, maybe 4 feet of track that I've done with the shoulders and everything, I did that over the course of 2 days. Certainly not working 8 hours a day, doing a little work, letting it harden, and then doing some more. So basically, you see, I'm just using my finger. I could use this. This is a dry brush. I could use this brush just to spread this ballast in between the ties. You want to make sure that you don't get ballast in the web of the rail. So I'm using my fingernail right here. I'm just running it. And this is a trick that I saw in Model Railroad of something Cody had done. And I just want to make sure, see if I got any low spots. I mean, honestly, I think this work of doing the center track is probably the easiest. It does get a little trickier when you're doing turnouts, maybe if I'm feeling brave. I'll show you that. I did manage to break one caboose ground throw already because of my technique, so I won't replicate that technique for you. So you can see it's just a matter of sort of making sure you've got it filled in between those rails. You don't want to cover up your ties, so you just sort of rub it out, work the ballast down along the track, and the more care you pay now, the less cleanup you have to do after. And once you're satisfied that you've got that filled in, it looks good. There's another little spot there. I was amazed at how well a little plastic dessert spoon works for this. I'm just running this along the web, and notice I keep moving everything in one direction. The idea being that I can always take the vacuum out and clean up what's left down here if I don't like it, before I glue it at least. All right, I think I like the way that looks. Make sure I don't have. Okay. So now the next step is to put the isopropyl alcohol. So that's in this jar here. I'll use an eyedropper to do that. And this is 50% isopropyl alcohol, 50% distilled water, and a couple drops of dish soap. And again, the idea of this is you're just going to put a couple of drops right down the center, and it should cover. The ballast will immediately change color as it soaks in. And this breaks the surface tension so that your glue, your scenic cement, whatever you, the matte medium, whatever you decide to use, so that will seep in. You want to be careful not to force out big squirts because that'll just push the ballast away. Good. We'll stop right there. Let's see, I'll take a quick look, make sure everything's covered. I could also have just gone down the side. That probably would have been smoother. All right. So once you're with it, once you wet it, you can't really do much to it. At this point, you really have to just focus on getting the job done, and whatever cleanup's left will be done after. So I'm going to give that a minute to soak, and while that's soaking, I will put a little ballast in this section over here. Now you notice there's a turnout here. You've got to be really careful. A couple things. First of all, you don't want ballast jamming in between the points here of the rail. I'm using my caboose throw. And then the other thing is, you don't want ballast in there. You certainly don't want glue in there. And that's how I broke a caboose throw. Fortunately, the ground throw broke, not the turnout switch. I got a little glue. The glue's thin, so it runs. So you got to be really careful with that. So what I'm going to do while that's seeping in, I'll just spread a little ballast in these. Yeah, notice I'm going just before the points. I'm not worried about filling in by the points right now. And I got to say, you know, once you get the ballast down and it's cemented, it really does seem to stiffen out the track. And it looks good. I hope you think it looks good. I'm happy with it. The other thing is when you're doing this, you really start to see some of the imperfections in your track work. Right now you're really starting to pay attention to it. But hey, okay, I'll finish up on that. This looks like it's nice and soaked, so now I'm going to put some glue. I'm just keeping my pipette for my glue in a little thing of water. It just keeps the glue from building up. So give this diluted matte medium a shake. Now we're going to take some glue, matte medium, we'll put it in the eyedropper, and now I will pay attention, and I'm going to just droop this along the sides. And as I do that, you can see it seeping into the rails. I'm basically giving it just a little drop as I go over each of those ties. Yeah, takes a little time, but it seems to work pretty well. You notice I'm only working in about a 14, 16-inch section here. Go down the other side. I'm not sure if you can pick this up on the camera, but I can actually see the glue is seeping in. Like on this side, you can see it's already has seeped in. You want to make sure you got plenty in there. You don't have to worry too much about it. Since it's thin, it'll pretty much clean up. It'll just pretty much dry right off those ties. I haven't really had any problems with it sticking to the ties. There we go. Let's see. And then if you've missed any, you can always just gently put some drops in there. Don't shoot it. You're basically letting some drops fall in there. Now that's pretty much it for ballasting the center track. So I'm going to stop for a moment, and then I'll show you how I apply the ballast to the sides before I go to the next step. Okay, while that center track, the ballast in the center is drying there, I just want to show you the shoulders. What I have here is just some thin white glue. It's not as thin as the matte medium. Basically, I put some white glue in. It's like 9 to 1, 9 parts white glue, 1 or 2 parts of water, just to thin it out a little bit. And I have a paintbrush here, And what I'm going to do is this section of track here has already been ballasted. So now I'm just going to paint the glue on here on the material, the roadbed. Got to be careful here by the switch, right? Because as I mentioned, we don't want to be getting glue on our switches. Paint that right along there. And the other side has already been ballasted, so we're gonna do the same thing here. Just gonna paint that on. Now this is not meant for ballasting the ties at this point. Right now I'm just gonna put a thin coat of ballast on the, to sort of define the shoulder. There we go. And in this case, I don't mind if there's some ballast stuck down in the center. So I'm gonna continue a little white glue here. I'm just doing a short section here to show you how this goes. This is really the only time that you're painting glue on. Normally for the ballasting, you're using an eyedropper and dripping it on. But for this situation, we're gonna just drop a little on here. And we just put a little, again, I'm using my very fine cinders. I'm just using a little at a time. I'm just gonna sprinkle a thin coat on here. And just lightly brush that out. I could use my brush. You notice I'm not trying to cover the ties at this point. Right now I'm just trying to get a little coating underneath. And the reason I learned from watching others' videos is that this allows us to, if you pile that up too thick and try to do it all at once, the glue doesn't penetrate far enough. And so this way, you get one layer and then you're going to do another layer. And this is why it takes a while to do this. You can't just throw it on and glue it in place. It's okay if you put on some extra because we'll vacuum up whatever doesn't stick. Because you're gluing from the bottom, what this means is material that is only going to stick on the bottom layer. So as you pile it up, it doesn't really help because it's not going to stick because there's no glue on the top. A little trick I saw from someone's post, particularly in this phase, if you want to save some of this ballast, turns out you go through a lot of it, just put a handkerchief on the end of your vacuum. If you got a shop vac, just put a handkerchief on the end and you can save some of the ballast. Okay, now I have a dry brush here, and I'm just going to go over this, move it around a little, make sure I just have my one coat, being very careful by the turnout. And it's okay if we don't have a total coverage right now, because we're going to put another layer over this when we fill in along the tracks, along the ties there. Okay, so I said this is a multiple phase process. Phase one was to spread the cinders, glue along the sides, sprinkle some cinders. Phase two, put the ballast down the center of the track, put a little alcohol on it, put a little matte medium of glue on it. Phase three, paint a little layer of glue on your shoulders and just sprinkle a light layer of ballast on each side. And then the final phase, not quite the final phase, the next phase would be after this dries, then we'll come in and we're going to pour the ballast in along our ties and over the shoulder, and we're going to shape it, and then we'll use the same technique we used here with the alcohol and the eyedropper and then the matte medium in the eyedropper to cement it in place. After that, it's cleanup. All right, we'll move on to the next phase. We'll move to a different section of track so I can demonstrate that. So now I'll just show you how we put this tapered, how we ballast the taper on the side of the tracker. And I'll just use this little section here along this curved turnout. So I've already previously put a thin coat of glue along this embankment. And then I sprinkled a light coat of ballast on there, and you noticed I did not do in between the ties. Now we're going to do in between the ties. We're going to finish off that embankment. And we have the ballast here. I'll just use my spoon. Now I'm working near a turnout, and so I want to be really careful here not to get anything in that switch throw. So I'm just tapping this ballast down here on top of the tie ends now. Just a little more. Got it for the embankment. And I'm just going to do this short section for now, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. And now we're just going to smooth this down on top of the ties. And when I do this, it pushes the ballast down towards the embankment, which is okay. We're going to deal with the embankment in a moment. There we go. Make sure you're happy with that. Don't be afraid to add a little more if you need to. All right, and then I'm going to take my little foam paintbrush here, which has this nice tapered edge. We're going to use that to get a nice embankment on the side here. And I just bring it up against there and kind of tap that. Try to make sure it's relatively uniform as we're going around the edge of the track here. If you get a little ridge, just knock it down. You can always pull a little of the ballast off to the side, in this case on the cinders, and I'll vacuum that up after. Just like I mentioned earlier, this is all about just taking your time. Don't be rushing it. If you rush it, you'll probably end up with something you didn't really mean to build. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Maybe just take a little bit more off the edge of the track there, off the edge of the rail. Just run my nail down there. Okay, I like that. Sure nothing's in the way of my turnout lever. Okay. So now we will put the diluted alcohol on the siding. We'll just drip it right down around the top again, right across the top of the tie ends. You can see how it seeps right in there. And I'm not really forcing it out, I'm letting it drip out, because if you force it out, it may actually displace the ballast. And then we're going to do the same thing at the bottom, right at the base, where the ballast is meeting the cinders I put down. Give that a minute to seep in before we put our glue in. All right. And once I put the glue down here, I'll stop the video. I'm going to finish. We'll continue this section down here, and then we'll do the same to this section on the inside where we need to cover up the tie ends. And then we'll let that dry overnight. And that gives you an idea of how we go about doing this ballast.